Yo soy María de Buenos Aires, de Buenos Aires, María, no ven quién soy yo. María, tango, María.
I want to talk to you about the world of the conductor, I'd like to say the mind of the conductor, but I think if you've got 10 conductors in a room, everybody comes from a very different bias in terms of how they perceive leading a production. And I'm going to restrict it to the world of opera, because the world of symphonic repertoire is a very different thing. Broadway is a very different thing. And if we think about the different duties and the responsibilities, even of those three areas of a conductor, in musical theater, the conductor is fairly low on the totem pole. And with all due respect to what they do, it's a very director-driven business, so that the music director, as they call it, is usually one of the last persons to get creative input into the piece unless they're workshopping a piece of music. Whereas in the symphonic world, the maestro is kind of everything. And in the operatic world, there's a very similar sort of ethos associated with the conductor. Because when it comes right down to it, what does a conductor do is, with gesture, I mean, he acts as a traffic cop. He's making sure everybody's traveling at the right speed, okay? Not honking their horns too loud, right? And making sure that the whole performance goes smoothly and according to the law. But that's where the interesting part for the conductor is what is actually the law? Because then the world of the conductor is based on the score. And conductors are considered to be guardians of the printed page. So the first thing when a conductor gets the engagement and begins to look at the map is do a structural analysis of the piece so that they know who's doing what at every second of the production. And I'm a big Excel spreadsheet guy, which is one of the reasons why I think this company likes me to also wear an administration hat, because I'm good with an Excel spreadsheet. So for part of my process is I will codify the entire piece based on the number, each number in the piece. I'll title it, I'll give the incipit of text that starts the piece, I'll give the orchestration and any kind of important diacritical markings, and then who's, like a who, what, where, when. Very similar to what stage management would do, but this is much more musically biased. And at the most important part for me at the end of it is to know the timings of each and every number. This Astor Piazzolla's Maria de Buenos Aires is a tango operita, and its running time is approximately 84 minutes. So during the rehearsal process, we are always cognizant of the arc of the piece and the running time of the piece, but very important for the conductor is the first day of school with the singers, where we discuss the piece, we talk about the piece, I tell the singers what I'm looking for stylistically in the piece, we determine issues of tempi, issues of color, how we want to interpret various parts of the piece, because this is in Spanish, in a very specific dialect of Spanish. This is, of course, from Buenos Aires. So there's the issue of the lunfardo, which is a very specific type of colloquialism, very indigenous to, like every community, every locale will have its slang. The lunfardo actually grows up out of a very low-class slang, as does the tango itself. And sort of it emerges onto a variety of social strata, as does the lunfardo dialect and the lunfardo slang. But we need to know about that, because we have native Spanish speakers in the production, but none from Argentina. So we bring in a dialect coach and a specialist who was born in Buenos Aires to make sure that everything is being pronounced correctly. But the other big time for me as the conductor is the first day with the orchestra. And now I go back to my Excel spreadsheet because typical orchestra rehearsals are 3 hours in length, okay? And that's defined as an orchestral service. That's the first time I get to meet with the orchestra. Now the orchestra has the parts mailed to them in advance, and part of the duties of the conductor is somewhere along the way we sneak in time with the orchestra librarian here from the San Diego Symphony, Courtney Cohen, who is fantastic. And one of her jobs is to open up the Bible and check all of the parts to make sure that there are no errata, so that all of the parts line up and everything is ready to go for that first day of rehearsal with the orchestra. Now in this particular piece, I'll talk about it more when we get into Maria proper, but this particular piece falls somewhere in the cracks because it's certainly not high opera. You know, this is not Italian opera. This is not French grand opera where it's been performed for hundreds of years, and you have what we call the urtext, the critical editions, where you investigate 20 different sources of materials that have been assembled for various productions here and there to make a definitive version of this. None of that exists, despite the scholarship involved in producing this, what we call partitura, the conductor's score. So between my conversations with Courtney, the orchestra librarian, I mean, we collectively have spent a good 100 hours outside of the purview of any rehearsing, just coordinating what's right and what's wrong. So if you look at the running time of this tango operita, 84 minutes, well, 84 times 2 is 168. So even if I spent 2 minutes rehearsing every minute, I wouldn't cover the material in that first orchestra rehearsal. Luckily, we've got 2, so I'll manage to do it, and sort of the standard rule of thumb is we try to budget 3 minutes of rehearsal time for every minute of performance time. That's a good template to see, and then you go, well, this is really easy. You know, the strings are just sustaining here. It's a fairly simple pattern. I won't need all 3 minutes on this particular piece, okay? So you can reallocate, as it were. But it's a real thing that conductors are cognizant about the arc of the piece, how to manage your time very effectively to get the effects that you want with the orchestra and with the singers. I think those are some of the keys to running a successful production. So why are you playing the piano in this production, you ask? Did somebody ask that question? Yeah. Okay, great. One, because I'm a pianist, artistic fulfillment. It's a juicy piano part. It's a very rich tapestry of technical challenges, beautiful melodic writing, very, very interesting rhythmic thrust in the music. It's dance music, after all. So what we kind of have is a dance kind of band associated with the piece. So the orchestration, as I mentioned, it's a flute. It's this Argentinian instrument called the bandoneon, piano, 2 percussion players, and then 5 strings plus guitar, acoustic and electric guitar. And so I talked to colleagues who have conducted the piece, most of them pianists. One elected not to conduct from the keyboard only because he's not playing as much as he used to. And this is a very fine pianist. And he said, no, there's a guy who can do it better in our orchestra, so I'm just going to let him do it. I spoke to somebody who's conducted it many times, who's a pianist, who said, I travel and do this piece a lot, and it's really in my body, and I just love to play, and I love the chamber music quality of what this is. And I sort of fall into that category with this piece. And there are people who conduct the piece who aren't pianists, so obviously, you're going to have to hire somebody to do that. And now we get to start to talk about tango. Now we get to start to talk about Maria de Buenos Aires. And this is a piece by Astor Piazzolla, of course, we know that, with a libretto by Horacio Ferrer, and the integration of the words and the music are a very interesting one, because the poetry in the piece is very surrealistic. Now, is everybody going to Maria? Yes. Okay, fantastic. It's going to be a great piece. It's going to be a great production. The one thing that as a production we are making a choice not to do, as we would do typically in a grand opera, where with the super titles, the people who write the super titles try to do a poetic translation of every single thing, or almost every single thing that is spoken or sung on the stage. Well, with this libretto, this book, first of all, it's impossible for a non-native Spanish-speaking person to understand if you were to read a translation, because it is very, very surrealistic. If you are a native Spanish speaker, this is the type of literature that you would puzzle over for years before coming to sort of an understanding and or an appreciation of quite the tapestry and the richness of metaphor and the richness of the poetry. So we've made a deliberate choice to tell the story just by telling the story and giving you sort of flashes of the gist of each and every scene. Tango originally, the roots of tango come from the Rio de la Plata, and it's sort of a amalgamation of African music, Brazilian music, and there was a great immigration pattern from Italy in the very early 20th century. So Buenos Aires has many, many Italians living among its citizenry. And Astor Piazzolla's father, actually, Nonnino, was of Italian descent. So you have all of this sort of mescolanza, to borrow an Italian word, mix-up of these different styles. And this tango music became a very low-class dance music. And it was sort of, you went into a very local barrio neighborhood and you could dance the tango. Now, if you were from the upper class, you wouldn't be caught dead in these parts of Buenos Aires, particularly from near the puerto, near the port. But the port was also a very big source of commerce. So it had to be on the outskirts of that region, because that's where all the wealth lay. And we talk about the porteños, the people from the port. Anyway, so the tango itself, the style grew up from very humble roots. It was played in brothels. It was the music of dance halls and very low dance halls. And then it sort of got legitimized, if you will, and it got cleaned up a little bit. Some good-looking young men started to sing beautifully on radio shows, and then tango became sort of the province of the middle class. And then this idea of going to what we call a milonga, the dance hall, where you can tango with people, becomes very fashionable. And so it continues to sort of rise through the class system of Argentina. Well, Piazzolla took this simple dance form and did add these ideas of sort of a modern perspective, but not so much a Western European perspective, but much more an influence of North American jazz in particular. There are times in this piece when you listen to it, and I suspect that many of you in this room might think, am I in 1970 in an elevator listening to this with the jazz flute and this kind of weird stuff? It's a very specific time period that this piece is associated with. And so what is tango? Well, first of all, we all know already, okay, that it's a dance. And originally, for your conversation at the bar before you go in to see Maria, tango was danced between men. Tango was a dance that was danced between men in order to attract a woman. And the woman would choose the dancer who had the moves. So it was very much a tango boxing match kind of thing, you know. Who could out-tango each other in order to get the girl was sort of where the tradition grew up from. So Piazzolla managed to take this very traditional dance art form, maintain the integrity of the dance, and then elevate it to a place where, I mean, where did tango go ultimately? I mean, Yo-Yo Ma has recorded tango music. Daniel Barenboim with Yo-Yo Ma and Astor Piazzolla has recorded tango music. Tango music has sort of spanned the arc of having very low origins, enjoying, you know, its rise through various strata of society, come into the world of classical music, where classical musicians have seen this art form, recognized it for what it is and what the potential for a classically trained musician to try their hand at it. And we get this art form now that is just fantastic, and Piazzolla is really sort of the kingmaker of the new version of tango. And tango has now evolved yet again, as it does from generation to generation, where you've got these young groups in Paris doing sort of pop rock tango with electronic instruments, and you know, everywhere you go in the world now, you can experience tango on one level or another.